We're talking about me,
no,
we're talking about you.
You've made it sound like Zimbabwe needs to go back to Zimbabwe to show that Zimbabwe is working. So why are Europeans not going back to Europe? Why are Asians not going back to Asia? Why are they staying in South Africa?
The context of the conversation is that you're saying that Zimbabwe is a beautiful country with great opportunities and people have run away from there to become waiters. The context is you are living here in South Africa when you could be going back and making that country work. That's the context.
You also forgot that I was asked to come here. Somebody thought my skills were important here.
I've been asked to go to other countries, but I believe in this country.
But why don't you believe in Europe?
No, I believe in South Africa.
Why don't you believe in Europe?
I believe in my country.
Why don't you believe in Europe?
This is not about me and you. This is about Zimbabwe.
But your question has to apply to you as well, though.
Is he saying the 5 million, 6 million Zimbabweans here were also asked to come here, like he was asked to come here? No, they were not asked. They jumped the border.
I was offered an opportunity to come to South Africa in 1999 by a South African company that offered me a work permit while I was in Zimbabwe. I was working as a manager in a company, and I came to South Africa because of the opportunity it offered me in the marketing space. So I did not leave Zimbabwe because of the fact that Zimbabwe was not good. Number two,
a lot of millions that are here.
Number two, there are a lot of people that are in South Africa that have run away from land to come waiters in South Africa. They've run away from mining gold, platinum, diamonds, and resources to come to South Africa because they would rather prefer to be given a job by somebody else, to use their CV rather than to take over the land, take the resources, and use those resources to become rich the way that it has made the Rhodesians rich.
Why don't they? I mean, if that's what you're saying, they're running away from those wonderful opportunities. Why don't they take up the opportunity? In fact, why don't you take up the opportunity? Why would you come and make your fortune here in South Africa when, as you've described it, you could be making a fortune in Zimbabwe? Why are you here?
Because I'm part of the problem in Zimbabwe. My attitude of thinking that I had to come and take up the opportunity that was offered to me here
so why don't you go
instead
home?
of mining land.
May I ask you that? Why do you not go home?
I am going home. But right now, I've also got family in South Africa. I've got South African children, and those South African children don't just allow me to just stand up and leave, but I do have projects that I'm taking part in Zimbabwe because I've learned that those resources are the most important thing.
If you have such faith in your country, in Zimbabwe, I would say and I would think you would get up and you would take your family and you would go and fix up the future of Zimbabwe. If you're saying there's land, if you're saying there's minerals, if you're saying there is so much wealth and opportunities for you there, you're living a contradiction.
No, I'm not living a contradiction.
You certainly are by sitting here. You're living a contradiction.
Because
people are suffering in Zimbabwe.
So why are people not
languishing here?
Why are people not going to the Netherlands? Why are Germans not going back to Germany? Is it because their countries are bad? Is it because they're running away from problems in the UK or in the States? Why aren't Europeans going? What are you doing here?
I live here. This is my home. I'm not running away from it.
Why are you living here instead of Europe? Why did your great-grandparents come here instead of Europe?
We're not talking about grandparents.
People of Africa, I hope you're doing fine. And if you're not doing fine, I pray that you do fine. Yes. So, I have a question for you. My question is, who is an African and who belongs to Africa? I personally believe that nobody is more entitled to Africa than an African. That is how I believe. Nobody is more entitled to Africa than an African. The reason why I'm telling you this is because there's this trending video, viral video, where a white journalist is having an interview with a black journalist who is actually from Zimbabwe. This white journalist who resides in South Africa is trying to banish this black journalist. He is telling this black journalist to go back to their country. So ironical to see a white person telling a black person to go back in their country, and she's saying that while in Africa. I don't need to get into the history of why this is ironic. This man from Zimbabwe, the journalist, does not just sit and let things slide. No, he stands up and he calls out the white journalist. She tells her, no, what are you doing in Africa? You should be in Europe. Yeah, that is how he answers this woman. And there's more to this discussion than what I've just told you. Now, without further ado, I want us to jump into the video, and then I'll give you my thoughts, where we'll also have a reaction towards the end of the video. Let's dive in.
Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much, Leanne.
So, You know, there have been very different views about the former and late President Robert Mugabe's legacy. Let's get your starting point first. What do you think his legacy is?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that what has been problematic is that the legacy that we have seen assessed by people hasn't been his legacy, but it has been about trying to seek faults in what it is that he stood for. But otherwise, Robert Mugabe was a humanitarian who stood for making sure that black people get emancipation. Emancipation that allows them to also have property rights and be able to ascend to being seen as humans who can self-determine without having to be mastered by anybody else or to be looked after by other races. And I think that's what Mugabe stood for. He was also a liberator and a man that made sure that he emancipated black people by ensuring that he gave them the best education, access to their resources, control to their resources, and also a Pan-Africanist who made sure that he defended Africa from imperialism.
Yeah. So, you know, everything that you're saying, some people may agree with it, but a lot of people may disagree with it, and I'm sure you're widely aware of that. A lot of what you speak about the former President Mugabe is very much so what he stood for years ago, and that was what people were attracted to him about, and what he really, really uplifted the country and promised a lot. But when you look, after all of the years in Parliament, and you look what's been left behind, many say that there truly is a humanitarian crisis happening in Zimbabwe, and this was just such a bad legacy to leave behind. What do you say to critics?
I say to critics who say that they might as well say the same about Churchill. They might as well say the same about Charles de Gaulle for what happened to France during the German invasion, because what we have in Zimbabwe is a country that is under war. It has been attacked by US war sanctions. 16 million people are being collectively punished because of the successes of what Mugabe achieved, because we live in an anti-black world that believes that black people do not deserve access and control of their own resources, and Mugabe was punished for that together with the Zimbabwean people. But when I look at the metrics of what it is that Mugabe achieved, the fact that the Americans decided to call Mugabe and Zimbabwe an unequivocal threat against the United States' interests because of giving black people access and control of their resources tells me that Mugabe was not really a failure, but what is happening in Zimbabwe is the country is at war, and that's what's causing the problems that we see.
People are starving in Zimbabwe. People don't have electricity. People don't have water. People are on the streets. They're leaving the country. They feel that there are no opportunities, that the country's falling apart. It's not serving them well. What are you talking to? I mean, why are we blaming that on sanctions against Zimbabwe? I mean, this is not, do you not believe, a leadership failure?
I don't believe it's a leadership failure. I believe that we've also got 50% of all Europeans living outside Europe. We've got 5 million Europeans living in South Africa. And that is also because of the fact that people migrate because they've got skills. And a lot of Zimbabweans that are in South Africa have also been attracted to South Africa and recruited to come to South Africa by companies that need their skills. That is testament to the skilling that Mugabe gave Zimbabweans and the education that he gave. Yes, we do have a crisis that is being caused. Refugees are coming into South Africa. Refugees are going all over the world. But a lot of that has to do with the sanctions that are on Zimbabwe. And what I always never understand is how it is that it can be justified for Germans to leave Germany to go to the United States because of the war that took place in World War II, but Zimbabwe...
Let me cut short. Now, this journalist, she's trying to make it seem like whatever the United States, whatever the West, not only the United States, the West is a collection of those countries which impose imperialism. They force sanctions. Now, the journalist is trying to make it seem like the sanctions are not what makes or what made Zimbabwe poor. We know that you are the country in Africa which had the highest inflation was Zimbabwe. Yes, we even used to make jokes as children that if you want to go and buy bread in Zimbabwe, you need a wheelbarrow and a lot of notes and coins to go and just buy bread. This was because of the sanctions that the US had imposed on Zimbabwe. It was because of Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe might have ruled Zimbabwe with the iron fist, However, he made sure that white people and foreigners who are not Africans were taken away from Africa, from Zimbabwe, and they went away, you know. He made sure that those lands which were grabbed by the colonizers were returned back to the Africans. And the West was not happy about this. You can clearly see and you can clearly hear from the journalist's voice and how she's doing her things, how she's saying, yeah. Like, it seems she's not acknowledging the words from this black brother from Zimbabwe. The brother is keeping his calm, you know. He knows what he's dealing with. So let's continue watching this and get to see where it leads to.
Cannot be accepted to leave their country when they're under economic warfare that has been imposed by a superpower like America, together with the entire Western world.
Yeah. If we look at the turnout, though, I mean, not the turnout, but we look at when Robert Mugabe was removed as president, what happened there? I mean, what did you read into that?
What I read into the issue of Robert Mugabe's removal was because there was uncertainty as to who was going to take over after Robert Mugabe. There was talk about Grace Mugabe ascending. And I believe one of the greatest weaknesses that Mugabe had was the fact that he never communicated adequately with his publics. He never communicated adequately with his citizens. And that doubt that was left as to who was going to replace him was the problem. But we understand that it wasn't even Grace Mugabe who was going to replace Mugabe. It was actually a man called Sidney Sekaramai who was supposed to come after. But that is one of the problems that they were.
Okay, so joining us here now on the program, I had said that he was going to join us as soon as he could, is Balazon Peter. He's a Zimbabwean journalist and activist discussing also the Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe's legacy. Thanks for coming. I'm glad you could make it just in time for the interview. We've been having quite an interesting conversation, and I've been hearing the views of our guest here in studio with us, talking to Zimbabwe, with our Zimbabwean president, Rutendo Matanyane, who is saying he was a humanitarian, he was a liberator, he was important with education, and he was a non-apologetic leader who's left a great legacy behind. What are your views on this?
What great legacy has Mugabe left? Mugabe is a remorseless tyrant. He destroyed a country. Why is Rutendo here? Why am I here? We are here because our country has nothing to offer us. Why are millions of Zimbabweans here? I just heard him say, why are Europeans in wherever they are? I missed what he said. We are here because, not out of choice, but because of circumstances. We have to make a living. We can make a living in our own country. Let's not romanticize bad leadership. Mugabe is an eloquent example of how not to run a country, a textbook example of how not to do things. He destroyed a country. And I find it a huge shame that there are people who see a hero in Mugabe, a liberator, who use all these phrases that my brother is using to describe a man who, in simple terms, was a very bad leader, destroyed a country.
Now, Mugabe's methods might not have been the best methods, but I can say that some things are necessary. Some things that Mugabe did are necessary. Some things. Now, Mugabe did not understand one thing. Remember the issue with Idi Amin in Uganda. Idi Amin did the same thing that Mugabe did. Idi Amin chased away all the Indians from Uganda. He made them go back to their country, India, or whichever place they came from. And now, the economy of Uganda started collapsing. You know, the economy of Uganda started collapsing. The same thing which happened in Zimbabwe. We have the aspect of the US sanctions, and then we have the aspect of privatization, the private sector. The private sector can sometimes boost the economy. Not sometimes, it does boost the economy. Mostly if this private sector is coming from from foreigners. Foreigners don't have to be white. That one is logical. You know, you find that these white people, for the case of Zimbabwe, and the Indians, for the case of Uganda, were bringing labor, they were bringing skills, they were bringing foreign investment, they were bringing, their trade would bring foreign exchange, they would attract other people like them, they would attract investors, they would attract this and that, you know. And so if somebody, a white person, wants to start a company in Kenya, for instance, and he learns that Kenyans don't allow white people to have industries, he won't. He will go to another country that seeks, or another country that accepts investment from white foreigners. And in turn, Kenya will suffer. The private sector will suffer. When the private sector suffers, the economy falls, because sometimes even the government borrows money from the private sectors. Most of the time, the government borrows money. The government is always in debt. It borrows money even from tycoons. I see it happening here in Kenya. Government borrows money and they are held desperate by these people. These people hold government in their own hands like this. The same thing which happened in Zimbabwe, the role of the private sector, Mugabe might have or underlooked it, and this really affected the economy of that country. In terms of decolonization, I can say he achieved something. In terms of decolonization, he might have achieved something because he made sure that the colonizer was no more. The colonizer was not doing any form of imperialism in Zimbabwe. In terms of economy, he failed. In terms of decolonization, he didn't fail. And because economy is what is making Zimbabweans leave Zimbabwe, move to South Africa, because they share the same border, this journalist is having pain with Mugabe. Mugabe ruled Zimbabwe for the longest time possible. He died. I think old age is what made him even leave that place. People are getting tired of him. But we can't overlook the things he did, the important things he did for Africa, leave alone the economic sector. The economic sector can only be boosted when there is decolonization, when there isn't any imperialism. And that, we should give that to Mugabe. Let's continue.
That in 1980 held so much promise.
Yeah. If you look at the turnout of his funeral, though, and you look at the send-off for the former president,
the turnout was very poor.
Was it poor? Because it looked like he got a hero's farewell.
No. There were several heads of state attended. But the National Sports Stadium was virtually empty. Mm. You can see it from your visuals.
Yeah. Well, what do you say? I mean, are you living in South Africa, Rutendo? Let's ask you that question. Do you live here?
Yes, I do live in South Africa. And I think it's very important for Bazilton to be able to take his context and not use that self-reference to think that that's my situation. I was offered an opportunity to come to South Africa in 1999 by a South African company that offered me a work permit while I was in Zimbabwe. I was working as a manager in a company, and I came to South Africa because of the opportunity it offered me in the marketing space. So I did not leave Zimbabwe because of the fact that Zimbabwe was not good.
Number two, a lot of millions that are here.
Number two, there are a lot of people that are in South Africa that have run away from land to come waiters in South Africa. They've run away from mining gold, platinum, diamonds, and resources to come to South Africa because they would rather prefer to be given a job by somebody else, to use their CV rather than to take over the land, take the resources, and use those resources to become rich the way that it has made the Rhodesians rich.
Why don't they? I mean, if that's what you're saying, they're running away from those wonderful opportunities. Why don't they take up the opportunity? In fact, why don't you take up the opportunity? Why would you come and make your fortune here in South Africa when, as you've described it, you could be making a fortune in Zimbabwe? Why are you here?
Because I'm part of the problem in Zimbabwe. My attitude of thinking that I had to come and take up the opportunity that was offered to me here,
so why don't you go
instead
home?
of mining
May
land.
I ask you that? Why do you not
I am
go
going home. But right now, I've also got family in South Africa. I've got South African children, and those South African children don't just allow me to just stand up and leave, but I do have projects that I'm taking part in Zimbabwe because I've learned that those resources are the most important thing.
If you have such faith in your country, in Zimbabwe, I would say and I would think you would get up and you would take your family and you would go and fix up the future of Zimbabwe. If you're saying there's land, if you're saying there's minerals, if you're saying there is so much wealth and opportunities for you there, you're living a contradiction.
No, I'm not living a contradiction.
You certainly are. By sitting here, you're living a contradiction. Because people are suffering in Zimbabwe.
So why are people not
languishing
Why
here?
are people not going to the Netherlands? Why are Germans not going back to Germany? Is it because their countries are bad? Is it because they're running away from problems in the UK or in the States? Why aren't Europeans going? What are you doing here?
I live here. This is my home. I'm not running away from it.
Why are you living here instead of Europe? Why did your great-grandparents come here instead of Europe?
We're not talking about grandparents. We're talking about me.
No,
we're talking about
you've
you.
made it sound like a Zimbabwean needs to go back to Zimbabwe to show that Zimbabwe is working. So why are Europeans not going back to Europe? Why are Asians not going back to Asia? Why are they staying in South Africa?
The context of the conversation is that you're saying that Zimbabwe is a beautiful country with great opportunities and people have run away from there to become waiters. The context is you are living here in South Africa when you could be going back and making that country work. That's the context.
You also forgot that I was asked to come here. Somebody thought my skills were important here.
I've been asked to go to other countries, but I believe in this country.
But why don't you believe in Europe?
No, I believe in South Africa.
Why don't you believe in Europe?
I believe in my country.
Why don't you believe in Europe?
This is not about me and you. This is about Zimbabwe.
But your question has to apply to you as well, though.
Okay. Is he saying the 5 million, 6 million Zimbabweans here were also asked to come here, like he was asked to come here? No, they were not asked. They jumped the borders out of desperation. They are here to make a living because their country has nothing to offer for them. Zimbabwe stands now as a destroyed country. All hope is lost in Zimbabwe. It doesn't help that the man who succeeded Mr. Mugabe is not doing any better. You saw when Mr. Mugabe was ousted in the military coup, the thousands and thousands of Zimbabweans who thronged the streets in celebration, who held hope that at least Mr. Mnangagwa was going to do things differently.
Yeah.
It's said that he is following in the footsteps of his former boss, and there hasn't been much change. But Zimbabwe is now a desperate, destroyed country. We cannot defend the indefensible.
Yeah. Very, very quickly, I mean, we've run out of time. I ask you in 30 seconds, just Mbeki says Mugabe's dream was to see other oppressed African countries free.
One thing that this white lady journalist is forgetting is that Africa has always been a source for market. Africa has always been a source for job opportunities for those white people, for the Asians, for the Indians. I just told you that the Indians were chased away from Uganda. It means they came here when they saw an opportunity. The white people were taken away from Zimbabwe. They came here when they saw an opportunity. Even here in my country, Kenya, we have Indians and they have very prosperous shops. Yes, Indians are doing well, even better than many, many Africans. It shows that indeed, there's an opportunity, there's a need, there's a gap that they're coming to fill. Remember, I told you about the role of the private sector in building the economy, the role of the foreigners in building the economy. The government has and does understand we need these people. And as much as they are not like us, they are not us, they come from a different country, we need them to build our economy. And that's why private sector is important. And so, this woman telling this gentleman to go back to Zimbabwe, and do what? And seek the job opportunities does not make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. First of all, she's a white person and she should respect Africans, being that she's living even in an African country. She's telling an African to leave a particular African country and go back to their own country. And when the African challenges her, tells her, no, even your people from Europe came here in Africa. What is here in Africa that they can't find back there? Why are they coming here? You know, just the same way I told you, nobody belongs more in Africa than an African. Nobody belongs more in Africa than an African. Yes, that's how it goes, you know. When we dismantle this borderless policy, when we dismantle the border policy and we have the borderless policy in place, we can't have such kind of discussions, not ever. The kind of discussion between a white person and a black person, a white person telling a black person to leave an African country is an insane audacity. It's an audacity, yes. Here in Kenya, I like using Kenya as an example. There is this white man who has a very, very big farm. He's called Delamere. Delamere has a very, very big farm which he took away from Africans during the times of colonization. He has fenced his farm. And anytime an African, maybe an African boy who was grazing, gets into his territory, he gets shot. Delamere just shoots him, or he sends his guards to shoot him, or he sends his dogs to eat up Africans. Many Africans have died in the hands of this white person called Delamere, and the government can do nothing about it. He is so entitled in Africa. He is not even an African, but he is so entitled in Africa to the point that he is even killing Africans. Yes, search for that story online. Delamere scandals. Delamere shooting scandals. Search for it even in Google. You'll find those stories. It tells us how much entitled black people are feeling here in Africa. Do you think an African could go to Europe, find a German person, and tell that German who is working in US, who is working maybe in France, we are in Europe, a German who is working in France, an African is telling the German, go back to Germany, you don't belong here. Do you think it will happen? It won't. It doesn't happen like that. There's no backward reaction. It's always forward. It's always the African who is facing the backlash, you know? And now, this lady, she's done wrong. This is extremely wrong. Now, let's finish up this video.
Which is, of course, why he supported the ANC in its liberation struggle. Is that a fair comment?
Well, it's a fair comment that Mugabe spoke for Africa's liberation. But that's not the issue. The issue is Mugabe's record in leading his own people. He destroyed the country. Zimbabwe is now completely a hopeless state to live in. I've been in Zimbabwe. The life there is so difficult. Yeah. So difficult. Why? Because of Mugabe's bad policies. Because of Mugabe's bad governance.
Yeah.
So let's not mix the issues here. Yes, he might have supported the ANC. So what? Many other people supported the ANC.
Okay. We have to leave it there, unfortunately. I'm sure you want to have a closing word.
Yes, absolutely.
And in 10 seconds, very quickly, please. Absolutely.
Yes, Zimbabwe has got its benefits, but we also have to acknowledge that it's at war. The entire Western world, a superpower nation, has imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe. And the fact that Basildon doesn't talk about it, I find it very interesting and very weird.
But the sanctions have been imposed because of what the bad things that these people are doing.
Where do you get that from?
Where do you shoot your people?
Where do you get that from?
Demonstrate and you deploy soldiers to shoot them.
All right.
Surely the civilized
world
is not
Where do you get that from? Where
When
the
opportunities in Zimbabwe, but these other brothers complaining so pessimistic. We don't need such kind of thoughts. You should do away with the thoughts. Bring in some positivity. He should be stoic. He should read some philosophy of stoicism. He should be happy. He should be so excited about Africa. Not pessimistic, blaming your misfortunes on other people. No, they might have done you wrong. But you won't always be sitting feeling bad that somebody did you wrong and now you're just there, you're doing nothing. Oh, somebody colonized me, I can't get out of this. No, it's us Africans to work ourselves up. Yes, it's us Africans to work ourselves up the food chain. Yes. Now, that's Evans from Kenya, EFK Original Documentaries. If you love the video, kindly subscribe. Remember, share your thoughts. Tell us what you think about this interview. Tell us, do you think who is an African or who is more entitled to Africa? Should we see Africa in terms of leaders who made us poor, or should we as the Africans themselves work our way up? Should we always be crying like babies? No, I don't believe we should be crying. There's time to cry and a time to heal. I think now it's time to heal, not time to cry. Share your thoughts in the comment section and remember to leave your thoughts, subscribe, like, give us a super thanks and become a channel member. Join my Patreon. Also, I know there are too many of things, but remember Do the one which works for you. Stay African, love Africa, stay positive. Don't be pessimistic. Stay positive. Africa is a good country. Stay positive right now. See you in the next one.